One of the most difficult things when visiting the Parthenon is getting a sense of its interior. This can be attributed to damage caused by the Venetian bombardment of the Acropolis during the Mauryan War in 1687. At that time, the defending Ottoman Turkish garrison had been using the Parthenon as an armory. The Venetian bombardment set off the ammunition stored within, leading to a catastrophic explosion. Furthermore, the Parthenon had been repurposed as a Christian church in the late 6th century and later a mosque by Turkish authorities in the late 17th century, also resulting in changes to the interior. Finally, acid rain and time have reduced the interior to its present-day condition. This talk will be dedicated solely to the interior of the Parthenon, including its basic layout and intended purposes. The best place to start this discussion would be at the entrance of the Parthenon. Here, the exterior columns are clearly visible. However, behind them we see 6 interior columns in various states of restoration. It's worth taking some time here to orient ourselves with these interior columns and the basic layout of the Parthenon. You will see in the diagram that these interior columns and interior walls of the temple form an area called the pronaos, which in Greek means before the temple. The pronaos leads us to the cella, or naos in Greek, which is the interior room of the Parthenon and where the great statue of Athena Parthenos, or Athena the Virgin, stood. Before we discuss the interior of the cella, let's examine the interior walls that framed it. The interior walls of the Parthenon are no longer present for the most part. However, this photo of the Temple of Augustus in the city of Ankara in modern-day Turkey is quite illustrative. Although not exact, the general structure of these interior walls found at the Temple of Augustus can be imagined in the interior of the Parthenon. The exterior cella walls, including that above the interior columns, had a marble frieze depicting 2 scenes. The frieze is immensely important as it provides considerable insight as to why the Parthenon was constructed. The first scene is that of the Greater Pan-Athenaic Festival, which celebrated the birth of Athena every 4 years. The second scene is that of the Battle Marathon, when an Athenian-led army decisively defeated the Persians. Some have attempted to unify these 2 scenes by postulating that this was a depiction of the last celebration of the Greater Pan-Athenaic Festival before the outbreak of war with the Persians. Many of the men who participated in the Pan-Athenaic Festival would have been the heroes of the Battle of Marathon commemorated on the frieze. In effect, the frieze was a chronological recount of recent historical events to the Athenians who constructed it. Here we have an example of a frieze surrounding the exterior portion of the cella walls found at the Temple of Hephaestus at the Agora of Athens to help you better visualize where the internal Parthenon frieze that we've been discussing would have been located. This painting by Lawrence Alma Tadema in 1868 depicts the sculptor Phidias showing visitors the interior Parthenon frieze, again helping us better realize its location and illustrating just how colorfully decorated the Parthenon was during antiquity. Returning back to the Pan-Athenaic Festival and the Battle Marathon, it can't be emphasized enough just how significant these events were to the Athenians and its relevance to the Parthenon itself. One of the hallmarks of the Greater Pan-Athenaic Festival was the sewing of a sacred peplos, or robe, that would be draped over the statue of Athena Parthenos, which stood in the cella of the Parthenon. So, the depiction of the Greater Pan-Athenaic Festival on the frieze was of religious significance to Athens, and particularly the Parthenon. The Athenian victory at the Battle Marathon in 490 BC, commemorated on the Parthenon frieze, was fought during the first Persian invasion of Greece by the Persian king Darius the Great. A subsequent second Persian invasion of Greece by Persian king Xerxes about a decade later didn't fare well for the Athenians initially. The Persians actually captured the city of Athens and razed it, including every single structure on the Acropolis. Despite this setback, an Athenian-led Greek fleet decisively defeated the Persian fleet at the Battle of Salamis in 480 BC. The following year, in 479 BC, a combined Greek army defeated the Persians at the Battle of Plataea, thereby ending the Persian threat to mainland Greece. The Parthenon was in part a war monument commemorating their victory during a period of warfare that spanned well over a decade. The Persian invasions were defining moments for the Athenian people, and the Parthenon, particularly its depiction of the heroes from the Battle Marathon, was their acknowledgement of it. On the other hand, however terrible these wars were for the Athenians, their victory appears to have inspired a confidence in them that propelled Athens into the fabled golden classical period of Greece and the formation of the Athenian Empire, which we will talk about later. The cella or naos was the central room of the Parthenon and housed the Chryse Elephantine statue of Athena Parthenos, said to have been 36 feet in height. Chryse Elephantine references a statue built around a wooden frame attached with slabs of ivory representing flesh and sheets of gold for garments, armor, and hair. Chrysos meaning gold and Elephantinos meaning ivory. This was the statue that was draped with the garment called the peplos during the greater Panathenaic festival depicted on the Parthenon frieze. The statue of Athena is depicted as helmeted and in her left hand holding a shield and spear to symbolize wisdom and strategy. In her right hand stands the goddess Nike, or the goddess of victory. Nike holds a golden laurel meant to crown Athena as victor. You may have noticed a snake present as well. The significance of this may relate to the early legendary Athenian kings who are often depicted as half serpentine. This point is a little too long to get into. However, I recommend my video on the Erechtheum if you want more details. Within the cella stood supporting columns which flanked a pool of water. This pool served two purposes. First, it maintained humidity, which was necessary to prevent the ivory of the statue of Athena Parthenos from desiccating. Second, the pool reflected light onto the statue, thereby helping to illuminate it. One very important last point about the statue of Athena Parthenos, which is it is not a cultic statue. In fact, there is no evidence that any offerings in the form of sacrifices, the single most important form of action in Greek religion, took place at the Parthenon. I know this may come as a surprise to many viewers, but the main cultic activity took place at the adjacent building called the Erechtheum for Athena Polias, or Athena the city, and not at the Parthenon for Athena Parthenos, or Athena the Virgin. On the other end of the Parthenon, adjacent to the cella, we have a room called the Adyton, which has a literal translation of not to be entered. Its entrance was through a rear porch called the Pistodomos. You may have briefly recalled how all of Athens was pretty much destroyed during the Second Persian invasion of Greece. This might lead one to conclude that Athens was financially ruined for decades following the war. However, this was not the case. During the course of the war, the Athenians cobbled together a defensive alliance of Greek city-states called the Delian League. At some point, the Athenians achieved unquestioned and complete control of the alliance and transferred the Delian League treasury from the island of Delos to Athens, where it was housed in the Adyton of the Parthenon. This de facto Athenian empire continued to collect taxes from the member states in exchange for Athenian military protection, nominally to defend them from foreign threats. Storing these monies at the Parthenon is hardly surprising since the Acropolis is a citadel. In short, the Parthenon was a war monument, a religious structure, a symbol of Athenian hegemony over other Greek states, and a somewhat ill-begotten state treasury. Whether it's the massive ivory gold statue of Athena Parthenos, the magnificent frieze in their original color, the arrival of the massive peplos every 4 years during the greater Panathenaic festival, or the vast Delian treasury, all would have been sights to behold. None of it remains any longer, but it doesn't stop the modern imagination. If you enjoyed this talk, please like, comment, subscribe, and check out my other videos on the Parthenon.